Thanks, Christian. My name is Molly McCammon, and I'm Executive Director of the Alaska Ocean Observing System. I've lived in Alaska. Those Alaskans who came here right out of college thinking I'd stay a year, and there you go. So I'm really pleased to welcome all of you here. It's going to be a gorgeous day today. It's supposed to be sunny. I'm convinced it's still summer. That's why I'm still wearing sandals. I do it until the very end, until there's snow. But I'm really pleased to introduce our opening plenary speakers today. We have a great tandem team. It's not usual that you have two speakers at the same time, but I'd really honored to introduce especially Alaska's esteemed Lieutenant Governor, Byron Mallott. The Lieutenant Governor took office in December 2014 with Governor Bill Walker as the first nonpartisan administration in Alaska history. Just think of that, nonpartisan. The Lieutenant Governor oversees the Division of Elections, which is really an important role. But from our perspective, what we really rely on him for is that he serves as the governor's chief fisheries advisor. He's the lead on critical issues such as our transboundary issues, such as transboundary mines and water quality, and also climate change. So his heart and passion are with the ocean and ocean resources. Byron is an Alaska native born in Yakutat. He entered public life at the young age of 22 as mayor of Yakutat, and he has not turned back. He has served in multiple roles in the public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector. He is truly a leader in our state. Joining him today is Nainoa Thompson, who is a native Hawaiian navigator and the president of the Polynesian Voyaging Society. He's I'm told best known as the first Hawaiian to practice the ancient Polynesian art of navigation since the 14th century. He's navigated 2 double-hulled canoes from Hawaii to other islands in Polynesia without the aid of Western instruments. So all of Nainoa's activities reflect his passion also for sustaining ocean health and resources and ensuring that the ancient marine heritage and culture of Polynesia remains vibrant into the future. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming these 2 gentlemen to open up this conference.
Thank you, Molly. And thank you all for being here this morning. On behalf of Governor Bill Walker and myself, the people of Alaska, I'd like to welcome you all to our state. As many of you know, and I suspect that some of you have been to Alaska before, Anchorage is not all of Alaska. Coming to Anchorage is like going to San Francisco and saying that you've seen the United States of America. And we hope that over time, and even on this visit, that you will take the time to see more of our state. We will, as a state, be standing up very soon a continuation of the state's involvement with climate change. We have hired a specific individual to be the climate advisor to Governor Walker and myself. She joined us within the past 2 weeks. Nikush Carlo, who had previously been involved with the Department of State, with the Arctic Council, and is herself an indigenous person to the state of Alaska. Sometimes when we say indigenous, it has different meanings to different people. The reality as we begin to deal, or as we continue to deal with the effects of climate change on all of our places, is that we are all indigenous to island Earth. Each of us are indigenous to some place, to some community. Yes, to some peoples. We are indigenous to a place and a community in terms of values and philosophies and spirituality. And those are important. They are particularly important as I speak of the state of Alaska, because for generations, First Peoples have not been part of the key decision-making that affects their lives. And without question, the First Peoples of our state live in the places where climate change is most affecting lives. And so in our efforts, we will reach out, we will endeavor as a significant priority to assure that the voice, the involvement, the leadership of the people who live in the places where climate decisions affect and, yes, change, to be key voices in the decisions going forward. I was anxious when asked to speak at this conference to recommend pretty vociferously that Nainoa Thompson be a speaker. In addition to the introduction made by Molly McCammon, the Polynesian Voyaging Society, of which Nainoa is president, has just completed on Hokulea a replica of an ancient deep ocean Polynesian voyaging canoe, finished a circumnavigation of the earth. Some 3.5 years. The theme was Malama Honua, a healthy earth. It was structured in order to demonstrate the vision, the courage, the capacity, the leadership of the First Peoples of Hawaii, but also engaging both with all of us who are indigenous to island Earth, but again, particularly with First Peoples around the world, to both recognize in a more fundamental, value-laden way, and also to bring focus and hopefully a renewed energy to the role of First Peoples in managing our collective and to many endangered future. So I'm not going to spend much more time of the limited time that I have speaking of our state and our role and the initiatives that we are about to take in order to step up our involvement as the United States Arctic place, as the United States, one of the United States areas, and Alaska is really another country, isn't it? In so many ways. But one of those places most affected by the impacts and the consequences of the changing climate that we deal with, and particularly of our oceans. Alaska is surrounded by oceans and seas, and the North Pacific is arguably among, well, probably not arguably, among those places where climate change will induce events and changes around the world that will affect our very futures. Nainoa Thompson is someone that I consider one of my very best friends. Our families are really connected in personal ways. I met him, met his family, met his father and his mother, who themselves are incredible leaders of shaping Hawaii's future. And one of the things that has endeared me so much to both Nainoa and the indigenous people of Hawaii is the powerful spirituality that drives everything that they do, and the courage that has allowed them to set sail upon planet Earth in order to learn, to educate, and to inform us all. So it is with deepest, not just pleasure, but honor and humility that I introduce to you Nainoa Thompson, President of the Polynesian Voyaging Society. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Aloha, aloha mai kako. I'm anxious too. I'm not a scientist or an engineer. I'm a sailor. So the request to come to talk to you, those of you in this room, about the oceans, very concerned about relevancy, making sure this message is connected. But I will say that, my connection with Byron is 27 years old, and we'll talk about it a little bit today. And it goes both ways. I mean, he's a best friend, but he's also a very, very important mentor in my life. And his family has shaped a much more fundamental belief that we're much more alike than we are different on the planet Earth, that our values and the things that we matter, the things that we stand up for are the same, whether it's in Alaska or in Hawaii. And so I'm forever deeply honored and indebted to my relationship to him and his whole family. And also at the same time that, this, all I can offer today is a story about the oceans. It won't help you with your challenges with climate change. It's not going to help you with your challenges in dealing with the changing chemistry of our atmosphere or the changing biology of our oceans. But it's just a story about the relationship of Pacific Islanders to the oceans. Like the native Alaskans, we in the Pacific had very little to do with climate change, but we may be the ones that will suffer the most first. And so we need you to help us with finding the way to deal with the kinds of very, very difficult challenges going on in the Pacific now. So even though uncomfortable and intimidated, I'm honored to be here. And hopefully that this day is a new beginning for us with relationships of those who have one of the major keys to dealing with the changing earth, and that is science, that is technology, that is engineering. So with all humility and great honor, I just tried to bring a bunch of visuals to this presentation to give you some idea about who I am and where we come from. And this just begin with this slide of astronaut Bill Ankers took that first photograph of island Earth when they circumnavigated around in Apollo 8 about the Blue Island. And it's the only one we got. It's the only one we know that has life, and so we should protect it. Next slide. My story's there in the Pacific, the largest ocean so-called on the earth. By the way, there's only one ocean on the earth. It's all interconnected. We all know that. But we call it the Pacific, half the salt water on the planet. And it's a blue island because, as you know, 70% of the surface of the earth is water. And that triangle there is where it's my country. It's Hawaii in the north, Aotearoa, New Zealand in the southwest, and Rapa Nui, Easter Island in the east. 10 million square miles, bigger than Russia. It's 3 times the size of the continental United States, and yet if you exclude the landmass of Aotearoa, you add up all the square miles of all the rest of the islands, you can fit them all into 1/3 the state of New York. 600 times more water than land. This is an ocean story. Next slide. And that's where I come from, middle of the North Pacific. My home, Hawaii. So-called most isolated high island archipelago on the earth, has the most extraordinary, diverse ecological system in the planet. It's all at risk. Next slide. This is a story that I'm going to touch on today. It's about the first peoples coming to Hawaii. It took a species on average to get to Hawaii, voyaging by air or by sea, living forms. About one species found Hawaii in every 200,000 years. But about 2,000 years ago, that's when the first footprint of humanity in Hawaii came. It came from isles in the south, probably someplace around Tahiti. And that voyage was probably about 2,400 miles long, and it might arguably have been the greatest feat of navigation and exploration on the oceans in its time. Next slide. The problem is we don't know anything about that story, because like many of the kind of chronic stories of what's happened in the last 200 years to Native people, essentially we forgot. We forgot the great explorers. We forgot the names of the canoes. We forgot how did they do it. How did they build those spaceships of our ancestors? How did they navigate them with just nature? Next slide. It's a long story, but there were these two key people that I need to bring in the room, which I think is somewhat relevant to today. One was a scientist. His name is Dr. Ben Finney from Santa Barbara, who was an anthropologist that basically wanted to change the story of Thor Heyerdahl, and also the anthropological belief that Native Hawaiians or Polynesians weren't intelligent enough to navigate more than 100 miles. How do you account for that voyage? Next slide. And he connected with this man. Phone call in 1968, not in Hawaii, but Ben Finney from Santa Barbara called this man, Herb Kawainui, Native Hawaiian, arguably the best modern day artist, but historian and author, wrote much about, he was doing enormous amounts of research into Polynesian voyaging that none of us knew in Hawaii. And the phone call was about, that was the beginning of our journey, my journey in life, and they talked about this vision of building a deep-sea voyaging canoe and sailing it to Tahiti, the homeland of our ancestors, recapturing our culture and rewriting the history of the great navigators. Next slide, and I'm going to go fast. Next slide, go for it. Yeah. Next one. And that's the first voyaging canoe in modern times in the not just Hawaii, but in the Pacific. This is Hokulea. This is taken the day before she was launched on March 8, 1975, from the sacred beach of Kualoa on the island of Oahu. She's 62 feet long, 22 feet wide. She's about 25,000 pounds when she's loaded. She's big, she's heavy, and she's driven by the wind. And I was there. In a time when things in Hawaii that were Hawaiian weren't valued by the larger society, were not taught in schools. In fact, were essentially outlawed by policy, by public school systems, that culture and language will not be allowed in the schools. All of a sudden you have this voyaging canoe that's elegant, that's beautiful, that's powerful, and with the promise to restore our culture. So this story is somewhat similar to yours. Our ocean story began with restoring our ocean culture and relationship to the oceans. Next slide. Problem: who's going to navigate it? Who knew the old way? Who was so kinship with nature was so deep that they could actually do something that difficult? Sail 2,400 miles, find an island that's smaller than the island of Maui called Tahiti, and cross the two big wind systems. This was the last known navigator of Polynesian descent. His name was Tevaki, from an island called Santa Cruz. And even though the research is being done by Herb Connie, they sent a team down to his island. He's elderly. And when they did all the research in that biggest nation on earth, it's the only name that came out. Sent a team down. They went down, told them the story about they haven't built a canoe. It won't be built for 6 years. And said, would he navigate? He said, we'll see. The team went back without a commitment. Herb Connie received a letter from his granddaughter about 6 months later saying, Tevaki had a small sailing canoe in a canoe house. He said goodbye to his family one day, got on the canoe, went out to sea, and never came back. And on one hand, that's extinction. 3,000 years of voyaging is over in Polynesia. But on the other hand, this Tevaki was really the standard and the bar of excellence of the ocean man. Remember him for that. But we had no navigator. Next slide. And this is what the story is really about. It's about him. Not in Polynesia, but in Micronesia, there were 6 masters still alive at the time. We're right on the edge of extinction. 6 masters, because Micronesia is changing to power boats, using compasses and so forth. And this man, his name is Pius Mau Piailug. Tiny island of Satawal, 1.25 miles long, half-mile wide. No lagoons, so the Spanish and the Germans and the Japanese and Americans had no military interest on his island, so navigation wasn't lost. Of the 6 master navigators, he was the youngest. He was the end of the great navigators. Next slide. Challenge. Hawaii on the top, tiny island Tahiti on the bottom, 2,400 miles, across the world's 2 biggest consistent wind systems, northeast and southeast trade winds, or they collide in the equatorial region, as you know, intertropical convergence zone, the doldrums, cloudiest remaining space on Earth. Very difficult to navigate. Next slide. But that is an old slide 3 days out from the voyage that left Honolulu Bay, Maui, May 1st, 1976. Mao was the leader. 17 on board. First voyage, 600 years. Navigating only by nature. Nothing else. And next slide. 31 days later, this is arrival in Papeete, Tahiti. 17,000 Tahitians were there. That's over half the population. That voyage changed the Pacific world in that arrival. Mao was successful. It reconnected us to our ancestral family, where we come from, and it did everything that Ben and Herb intended to do. That was to change history books, but revive culture, bring pride and dignity back to Pacific people, give it to their elders so they can give it to their children to restore dignity, which restores self-esteem, which restores health. It's the pathway. Next slide. The Mao did the next miracle. You know, I'm recipient of that, one of many. He came back for 30 years to train us, to teach us, to show us the way. That's a long story. So we're deeply indebted in the Pacific for him finding Tahiti, raising it out of the sea, bringing back pride and dignity, and restoring self-esteem. And we also thank him for being our teacher. Next slide. I go back to this slide because then we went on 13 different voyages. 12 more voyages through the Pacific, exploring, rediscovering, connecting to all of our Pacific Island nations. So that big kind of triangle on 13 different voyages, we went pretty much to all the major island groups in Polynesia over the next 34 years. Next slide. But I want to talk about one of the voyages really quickly and briefly, and that's how I met Byron. Hokulea is made mostly out of non-traditional material. We started in 1989 on a second project to make a voyage out of the things of our forest. And the idea was to bring all of our elders together to help and bring it into a single focus, a single vision, a single project that we could focus on. And that was building a second voyaging canoe that was completely native to our home. And we searched for 9 months. We began, if you imagine that Native Hawaiians needed canoes and they built 50 a year over 2,000 years, 2,000 years, that would be 100,000 canoes. We searched for 9 months in our forest, and we found trees big enough, but we didn't find a single tree that was healthy enough. not one, to build half of the voyaging canoe. So that was really the moment that drove us into the notion of responsibility, that something's terribly wrong. What we've done in the past, where we are now. And so we wanted to continue the voyage. There was a second source of trees. In fact, the largest tree that was recorded in Hawaii, the largest voyaging canoe was recorded in Hawaii, was 107 feet long, twice the length of Hokulea, on the island of Kauai. And when Captain Vancouver asked the chief that owned the canoe, he said, no, this is a gift from the gods. It was a driftwood log from the Pacific Northwest. And so there was an elder of ours, actually it was Herb Connie that made a phone call to an elder called Judson Brown. We're always deeply indebted to him. They knew each other, they were very, very dear friends. And Judson said, call Byron, who was the chief executive officer of Sea Alaska. And I wasn't on the phone call, but I heard that it was instantaneous. Byron said, yeah, we'll give you the trees. Build your canoe, carry your culture. But what it did was, that gift of those two Sitka spruce trees, they found the trees. These are big trees. They shipped it to Seattle. They shipped it to Pier 1 in Honolulu. All we had to do was drive it 5 miles up to the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, but to build this canoe that would bind us between Hawaii and Alaska forever. So that was one gift. Today is another gift that now that we focus and the restoration of culture, the renewal of culture, the question is, can we renew our oceans? And it's going to take Byron, it's going to take our relationship to make that happen. And so, next slide. We sailed it to Tahiti and the Marquesas, back to Hawaii, and then we shipped it to Seattle because it's too rough outside here to sail, and we sailed it up for 1,000 miles up the Intercoastal Marine Highway to 16 native villages to thank them for the gift of their children and their forest. And that was an extraordinary voyage. It started to strengthen the relationship between us and Alaska in younger people, another generation. Next slide. Excuse me. Yeah, maybe go back 2 slides. Maybe go back 1 more slide. A friend of mine, Lieutenant Colonel Lacey Beach, he was born in Hawaii and raised in Hawaii. He's an astronaut, loved Hokulea, talked about exploration. Next slide. Part of the shuttle program at the same time we're sailing. Next slide. And then he said, hey, Naino, I got a gift from you. It's a photograph. And so that's the cockpit window of Columbia. That's the edge of the earth. Look in the corner, the bottom corner of the window, there's the island of Hawaii. At 12,500 foot elevation is the adze core. 35,000 years ago, Hawaii was a glacier, by the way, and there was volcanism, made this very, very tight-grained, heavy stone, arguably the best. See that thing floating in the cockpit window that he kind of smuggled on board? Heavy, sharp object, zero gravity, and he took the photograph. That was the technology of the time to build voyaging canoes. Those stone adze is hot. And so he took that up there because he was very, very concerned. This flight was in 1992. He's very, very concerned about what's happening to the Earth as a scientist and as a mission specialist. And he was trying to figure out solutions. So he talked about, hey, I know, here, we look at, the adze represents us needing to look back 500 years at the genius of our people. And also, we need to use the technology that we have and navigate it by the right values to aim it towards and coming together with old knowledge, new knowledge, solve problems. And next slide. Take Hokulea around the earth. He said, you can't protect what you don't understand, and you won't if you don't care. And you can't do it by yourself. Hokulea needs to go and sail around the earth and learn, and you need to connect with people around the world. They're much more alike than you are different, and take Hokulea around the world. He planted the seed in 1992 of the idea. And then he died in 1995, lymphomelanoma. We lost a great explorer in Hawaii. But we had that idea, the seed in our heads, and leadership. For 16 years, we would talk about leadership coming together in the voyaging community. We'd all talk about coming together, and wow, what a powerful idea, take Hokulea around the world. And then we would go into conversations, which, well, how dangerous is that? I mean, really, how dangerous is that? And does the idea be so powerful that it outweighs the risk? For 16 years, it didn't. And every time we talked about going around the world, then we talked about danger, we wouldn't go until we started to listen to science and the new language that is upon the earth. Things like, when we launched Hokulea, sustainability wasn't a word. Climate change, we had no idea what that might mean. Even though it was all happening, we didn't know. But then, in the next 16 years from 92, we start hearing stuff like global warming. We start to hear about raising sea level. We start hearing about stuff like hypoxia, dead zone, acidification, and all those kinds of stuff, raising the temperature, increasing the amount of hurricanes, and the strength of hurricanes and duration of dangerous times. So we, at some point in time, I don't know when it came, but in the community, we met on April 1st, 2008, and sat down as leadership, and then raised the question, shall we go around the earth? The question was not whether we should go around the earth. That was inevitable. But the question was, what's more dangerous? Is the pirates? Is it the hurricanes? Is it the rogue waves? Is it the mosquito? Is that more dangerous to take on going around the world that we debated over 16 years? Or is it more dangerous to leave the canoe tied to the dock and don't do anything? Don't do anything. So that your set of responsibilities to your, not just your home, but to your children. To your children. The vote was unanimous. We voted 4 times. It's going to take everybody to do this. And we agreed to go around the world on April 1st, 2008, having no idea how you're going to do that. And because we just were too much informed, we were just too honest about it wasn't a choice anymore. And next slide. I think it ends here. I have a short video that I want to show you about the worldwide voyage, and then I'll finish this long presentation. Oh yeah, so I'm sorry. So this is a Hokulea in the middle of the Pacific. We left in May of 2014. 37 months, 42,000 miles. Went to about 308 ports around the world and learned as much as we could, connect as much as we could. And if we could play the video, please.
7,000 years ago, the first really oceanic people came out of China, and it came out of Taiwan. Then you get to Polynesia, this oceanic country bounded by Hawaii in the north and New Zealand in the southwest, and Rapa Nui in the east. 10 million square miles, bigger than Russia. And it was discovered by these extraordinary people. They were really the astronauts of our ancestors. They were the greatest explorers on the face of the earth.
You know, our ancestors not were only just great navigators, they were great stewards of these islands. The time that the first Europeans came, the journals of Captain Cook talked about, you know, large populations, maybe 800,000. That's the median. It could be even higher. It's approaching maybe the numbers of people that are living on Hawaii today. They figured it out, how to live well on these islands, and I think that is the challenge of the time for planet Earth and all of humanity. It's to figure that out. How are you going to do that? Hokulea is pulling us into a direction of asking the question, are you going to be responsible and are you going to take action? Are you going to do something with what you have? You got a voyaging canoe.
Hokulea, to us, to go around the world, has this enormous potential to go to 40, 50 countries on the planet, to be with the great navigators on Earth. And I'm not talking about those in canoes. I'm talking about those who are doing things
to give kindness and compassion to the earth and those who live on it. Those navigators. We're not going to change the world, but we're going to go and build a network of people around the earth who are going to change it. And our job is to help them be successful. We're going to go around the world, and I'm going to take the risk to do it because the greater risk is to not act. The greater risk is to be apathetic. The greater risk is to remain ignorant, and the greater risk is not to take action.
In 3 years, Hokulea traveled more than 40,000 nautical miles, stopping at over 100 ports of call across 27 nations. Her cruise connected with some of the world's greatest influencers and engaged with those creating innovative solutions to protect our island Earth.
In my humble opinion, the success of the worldwide voyage was really building relationships from strangers from around the world. I watched our crew members. Every single place we went to, everybody that they met was treated with respect and with decency. That was the key and the core to the success of the voyage. That is why we have strangers turn into relationships, and relationships are now coming together as a movement around the same thing, caring values. Mālama honua.
Hokulea returned safely to Hawaii, welcomed by a network of people from around the world who have been inspired by her voyage.
What I'm really thinking about more and more now, I'm just imagining, just imagine where Hawaii is going to be in 20 years. I mean, all these kids coming up, they're just going to be extraordinary leaders. What we need to do is stay on course, keep going, move inspiration into action, and really help move the movement of kindness around the earth so that it starts to have real impact. And you need to do that through your core relationship and build others. And get Mālama honua off the canoe into the communities. People need to know about what people are doing in classrooms, in our universities, in their backyards, in our coral reef, in the watershed, in our lo'i, in our fish ponds. I mean, we need to just capture the stories. It's going to start to celebrate all these people that people don't know. This is the canoe, and it's our communities are the navigators. I think we're on course. But the voyage ain't over. It's that simple.